The May 1st, 2025 work session meeting of the Mount Pleasant Planning Commission is now called to order. Ms. Pavidakis, will you please take roll?
Yes, so we just have one item. Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Devaney? Absent. Commissioner Friedrich? Absent. Commissioner Havels? Commissioner Irwin?
Here.
Kingsworthy?
Yes, here.
Leash?
Here.
Ortman?
Here.
Farley?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. The first item on our agenda is for this work session is regarding short-term rentals. Ms. Pavidakis, will you please introduce the item?
Yes, so because we are getting a lot of short-term rentals, we thought it would be a good time to just check in with the Planning Commission, how you think about the policy, how it's going, and see if you would like to think about any potential changes. So I did provide a short memo, but I do have some slides about it after doing some research. So the goal here is for the Planning Commission to let staff know if you're interested in keeping the current ordinance requirements for special use permits, or if you'd like to make any changes, either on the policies or procedures regarding short-term rentals. So here I made a list of pros and cons about short-term rentals in specifically non-touristic cities like Mount Pleasant. So the pros is that it provides different lodging options to support the local economy. And for a long time, staff has been talking with the CVB, and we have identified that when we have really large events, we don't have enough hotel bedrooms. So Airbnbs have been a way to fill in for that in case that is the option. Otherwise, folks are going to adjacent municipalities for a stay. Temporary living arrangements for traveling workers or new residents is something that we heard from a few applicants. And again, because of the nature of where we are located, if we do have big construction projects, we may get construction crews, traveling nurses. Sometimes, if you get a job in Mount Pleasant, we have really low vacancy rates for housing inventory. So folks have a hard time finding a place to stay in the long run right away. So short-term rentals provide that accommodation. They also provide for more productive use of different premises. So for example, summertime, if it's a student housing or seniors, I have a lot of friends in my neighborhood that tend to go away to Florida during winter months for 4 months. So that could be a way that they can earn some income and bring that income back and spend in the community, hopefully, or their houses. So again, talked about extra income, and then more property and building improvements. Usually platforms like Airbnbs tend to have a higher standard for stay. So even when the applicants have been bringing short-term rentals, not all of them, but many of them have already improved and invested in the site before they even get to the approval. And sometimes they get the approval and invest and get building permits for interior renovations afterwards. Owners, I guess the overall investment helps increase the overall value on communities as we see, facades and sites just looking better over time. So the cons is that the conversion of long-term rentals into short-term rentals is possible. So folks may find that they can maybe earn the same amount of income if they rent for weekends and charge more as opposed to charging long-term rentals. So we could potentially reduce the availability that we already are short of, particularly for rentals per the state housing gap analysis that they conducted. The state has published in 2021 that we're short of 80 dwellings, owner-occupied dwellings in the community, so we could build 80 units. And I believe it was close to 300 rental units, so that could be an issue. Guest turnover can also obviously impact community cohesion in areas that are more residential in nature because it's a temporary stay, so you see different people at different times. So that's usually the fear out of the residents' minds. And then it could be difficult for the city to monitor and enforce compliance. So we really rely on a compliance-driven approach. We obviously would follow up, and I do have data here on the ones that already have approved and how the violations list are very minimal. And if they did get a violation, it got fixed right away. So that is just how it's driven. But if it's regarding noise, for example, we're going to be reliant on neighbors calling the city, and we will have to monitor it. And that could obviously take city resources. Income gains, they go mostly to property owners or the investors in case folks are buying to invest and do more Airbnbs in the community. But in the pros, we also talk about how guests spend in the community. So it can go either way, but most of it go obviously to the property owners. And then the influx of visitors could potentially strain local infrastructure, but I think this would have to take a much bigger scale. And this is in the sense of guests needing to just have different types of infrastructure, especially for mobility, and maybe utilize some of our services when the time comes and we get more folks in for a certain event or something like that. So just to state what the current requirements are, so we're all on the same page. It's very simple. The zoning ordinance requires a special use permit for all short-term rentals. We allow them in every single residential or mixed-use districts in the city of Mount Pleasant. So CD3L, CD3, CD4, and CD5 includes downtown, Mission Street, and the inner neighborhoods, and also in agriculture districts, which we don't have a lot of properties mapped to SDA, but we have maybe one or two along Broomfield. And then all short-term rentals have to pass fire department inspection. They need to have a long-term rental license. They have to pay a fee annually for that long-term rental license and pass inspections every year to ensure the safety of the occupants and that there is no hazard, that it could be potential hazard to neighboring properties as well. So we do have a current zoning penalty structure, and I put this slide here just because on the previous planning commission meeting, we did have some conversation about this. So the good thing about subjecting short-term rentals to a special use permit is that we have an easier way to apply, noise, traffic, odor, those kinds of nuisances through the zoning ordinance itself. Aside from that, we will be reliant on the city code, which also has a chapter about nuisances, and we could enforce in that way. But through the short special use permit, we could enforce pursuant to the zoning ordinance chapter that you can see in section that you can see here. So basically, let's say we got a call, someone is just impacting traffic, just blocking driveways or streets or something like that. If they are renting for too many people, they're not, limiting to up to 2 unrelated occupants, as usually the short-term rentals that we have are subject to in terms of restrictions. We would send a letter through the building safety department saying that they have violated the zoning ordinance and code to the general standards chapter. And then we would just give a first notice. If they repeat that, usually that's what staff then goes after and basically charges and actually files for a civil infraction and charges them $50 for the first violation, and then it increases to $100, and then to $250 is the maximum, and we can keep repeating that until that's resolved. And if we have too many of them, we can revoke to the special use permit based on that data that they haven't complied, and then it's gone, right? So then they are not allowed to announce a short-term rental anymore, and it's revoked. So this is the list of the ones that we have approved. The way staff does enforcement, we don't have a lot of resources to be looking out for Airbnbs all the time, but we do random, times of the year, and we just check the platforms that are mostly used, and then we would send letters to to owners and give them a call as well and ask them to come for a pre-application meeting and go through this process. So you can see how usually in the beginning of the year we have more short-term rental applications, and that's this didn't happen this year, but last year it was because we were doing enforcement towards the end of the year, and then they applications came in right in the beginning of the year. So we have 12 right now, and then with the 3 today, it will be 15. And as I mentioned, not a lot of violations.
So if I'm interpreting this right, the oldest currently licensed short-term rental is from 2022.
Yeah,
Okay.
so yeah,
Oh.
it seems that we didn't process any since the adoption or since 2018. In the past, I forgot to do my research on the past zoning ordinance, if we allowed short-term rentals or not. Maybe one of you may recall.
Yeah, I can talk about that later.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, we had 2 violations. Basically, one of them, they were renovating the unit and just put furniture outside. So they got a violation. And then trash carts just being out in the right of way kind of thing. So that's for the other parcel that you see here. But all are complied. So I placed some discussion items in case you do want to discuss if we should change anything. But those are just some things that I've seen by doing precedent analysis. So just to cite some, just kind of go through them. First one is geographic treatment, restrictions on residential, more allowances in commercial. That's what I've seen. When we look at cases regarding short-term rentals, usually they are placed more in commercial categories as opposed to residential when we look at court cases more specifically. So that's just something to note. And then I've seen also restrictions on residence districts for short-term rentals to be allowed only when it's owner-occupied housing. And then there's also different municipalities that limit by occupancy. So without regard if whatever long-term rental license you have, it cannot exceed 8 occupants per short-term rental unit. I've seen that. Or you can limit the amount of time within a year that you can rent. But again, all of those things are really hard to enforce, but are things that I've seen. And then also there are places that don't allow the special use permit to stay or the license for short-term rental to stay with the premises. It's with the owner. So it's a different type of registering them as opposed to a permit through the planning commission. And in that case, if the owner sells, they can pass it, right? So it's a more like the idea of building relationships with owners. And then you could revoke permits based on a maximum number of complaints. I think it's nice to put that in writing in case we ever do that, so we're not legally challenged. And yeah, and then there may be other things that you've seen. So that is my presentation for you, and welcome discussion questions.
I got a quick question. Are large apartment complexes eligible to get short-term rental?
Yeah, so when taking care of the case on the rooming dwelling, we don't have any typology related type of rule requirement. So you could have units within a multifamily.
Okay.
That through point 3C, you mentioned that, currently it's tied to the property. A change would mean it ties to the owner. That doesn't mean the owner carries something with them. It just means that the owner at that location holds that permission. And then if the ownership transfers, then
It dies, yeah. The allowance dies both for the owner and the parcel. Yeah.
Short-term is 28 day and less. Is that the definition?
Yeah.
So if we tied it to an owner and they unfortunately died, would there be would the city have to go and evict the people immediately, or how would that work if the license was canceled?
That's a good one. I guess it would take some time until we figure this out. Yeah, I think it would still stay, right? Because the ownership was not actually transferred. So the permit would still be valid
It would get
until
transferred someday.
you sell the property to another entity.
And just for clarification, for long-term rental licenses, like those permits, those are with the property though, right?
Those are with the property to, with the property, not the owner, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So owners, they can say, oh, this is. part
Yeah,
of
that's
this
right.
rental, you just-
so yeah, so I'm gonna kind of just say it again because Susan didn't have her microphone on, but the long-term rental licenses are the same as special use permits. They stay with the parcel. And once you sell the property, usually realtors, they tend to inform that there is a rental license because oftentimes I do get calls from the fire department, someone lapsed. And then if that's the case, let's say it's a non-conforming rental license that allows for more occupants than zoning does, then they lose that allowance. So it's a little bit tricky that way because it needs to be renewed every year, but it does pass along from owner to owner if they keep paying the fee and getting the annual inspections.
And so in short-term rentals, they're the same way, they have to renew every year? And
No.
Okay,
No, so that's a one-time permit as for any other special use permit, like a gas station or drive-through establishment. They come for the planning commission once, and that permit stays with the property. The only time that they have to come back to the planning commission is if they do any substantial changes or if the ordinance changes. So if they do a use expansion, so you have, let's say, a short-term rental that now is doubling the size, that actual building renovation, expansion of use on site will trigger a new planning commission special use permit. Or if we change the zoning ordinance substantially, that we need to revisit special use permits if there's any scope of, changes that applicants come with and bring to us, if that
So-
makes sense.
so even though they don't have to renew every year, they're still subject to inspection every year, right?
So special use permits, yes. So the building safety official does inspect special use permits. I wouldn't say it's that frequent on an annual basis.
I guess a question here is, say they get a short-term rental license. If they don't renew their long-term rental license, can they still do a short-term rental? Are they still technically okay? Because as far as short-term rental annual inspections, our building inspector does not enter the premises like our rental inspectors do, so there is a difference.
Mhm.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Is they allowed to continue to short-term rent out if they don't have? it?
No, so you need to have a valid rental license. So if the rental license lapse, the short-term rental use is no longer allowed
Okay,
until they get a new rental license. So it's kind of like dormant, if that makes sense.
okay.
I mean, it seems kind of redundant if ownership changes. I mean, they're just gonna come back here. We're gonna hear,
Right,
and then,
right. I
Yes.
mean, if they're still getting inspected and things
Yeah.
like that, and that's related to the rental license, I think that's,
The only,
yeah.
I guess I have a question.
Yeah.
So if, say, somebody has a special use permit for a short-term rental for, say, 10 years, and we adopt new zoning ordinances that would require changes to what was originally approved, would those changes be required when the special use permit?
No, so it would be grandfathered in, but if they want to do any physical changes to the property, then it gets triggered right away.
Okay.
Whereas right now, like transfer ownership or if they want to change landscaping, something small, that wouldn't trigger a special use permit. In our specific requirements, we clearly state that it's basically if you're adding amount of rooms, that re-triggers the special use permit. So if we create something like that in the future, that's something that would start from that time on. Yeah.
I'm more interested in, I guess, 3D, just revoking the permits based on a maximum number of verified complaints per year. Like you said, just to get it in writing. And I think I mean, maybe I'm just speaking, but like, we have gotten a little, public comment from neighbors and stuff like that, being like, think everyone's gonna have a party house with their short-term rentals, so maybe having that at the meeting might quell a little
Well,
fear.
I think it probably should stay a special use permit, though. Is anybody thinking about not making it a special use permit?
No, I think it should still be a
I
special
think,
use.
I agree. I think
Okay.
it still should be a special
Yeah.
use. permit.
Yeah, I think what he's saying is that, if a unit had like 5 complaints, like what is do we have a current, consequence structure? Consequences
like,
is
is
the
it in
wrong
writing?
thing, but yes, if it's not in writing, it doesn't happen.
Well, if I'm a cranky neighbor and I
Yeah.
don't want someone there, I might call every day.
Just complain 5 times, you met the
Yeah.
threshold of 5.
Yeah.
that's-
Well,
Yeah,
violation,
yeah,
not
so
just,
the-
hey,
Citations.
the dog
Yeah.
is
Not verified
barking.
complaints, it's
Yeah.
citations we're talking
Yeah,
about.
yes, that's.
And so other than that, that was gonna be my point, and the rest of it is when you look for 2022 and newer, I mean, we had these go to plan commission in like 2017 and 2018, 2019. Jacob went on an Airbnb.
Yes.
It was like Jacob went on Airbnb, pulled things up that weren't authorized.
Oh,
Those
yeah.
are, right, you got an app, I got Airbnb, Airbnb up my phone, I could, just go look
Makes-
these up.
yeah.
You find that, well, those went out of business. So one thing that's not spoken here is there isn't a huge enough market, as my understanding, for us to turn into the two, because Manuel made a good distinction, say non-touristy
Not
places.
touristic.
Yeah.
But like, if you really were gonna use this just as a full-time investment, you might be trying to rent out, say, 20 days a month throughout 12 months of the year. I just don't see enough demand to go and, I think it's one of probably a few things in town where kind of at equilibrium.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where the pot shops are. Like, what, I just don't see an influx of this. I don't see this being a major public policy issue, and that's why I just don't see this being an issue, except if people want to look at 3D and say, hey, it's citations. If that is something that legal advice would be sound, I think that would work better than the neighbor complaining 5 times to get to that threshold to get a change next door.
Yeah, I agree with the
Yes, definitely
citations.
substantiated claims, not just.
Yeah.
Because also when I see the complaints usually come here and it's people that are very well intentioned and they might be right and we might be wrong because it's their lived experience within the next
Right.
door. It's also between the lines, I'm guessing it's people who aren't familiar with using short-term rentals. So there's a lot of worry when you see something you haven't seen before. And so sometimes you see, maybe you don't see the good in some things and might
Yeah.
bring some people to town to otherwise in places that might just be sitting empty.
Well, I think we saw a prime example of that, of when we did have a huge influx, when Jacob first came through and we were gonna work on getting all of these licensed, and we had a whole bunch of people in, and we did have quite a few people in the community come to express their concern of what they thought was going to be a problem, and then they realized, oh, you've already been renting it for the last 2 years? Oh, okay, it's fine,
Yeah.
and so,
That huge influx was still, if I recall correct, I don't remember anymore, but it was like less than a dozen of these.
Yeah.
And we're still at what, 12 that are currently licensed based on
Right.
Manuel's table? Whereas if it's like Petoskey or Marquette or somewhere like that, Ludington, at least Marquette, I think is capped at like 250 or so, right?
right.
But if we started getting 100, then I think we should revisit this issue.
Right, and I mean, I'm someone who does use Airbnb regularly, and depending on the community that you're staying in, I mean, the last one, my friends and I stayed in a really nice place in South Haven. We had like a 3-page agreement we all had to sign, an agreement that we weren't going to park on the road, that we weren't going to move the trash can, that we weren't, like, there's a lot of things that we had to additionally agree to, that we were going to comply with community ordinances. And that was in the renters agreement. I mean, as far as like for us everybody that was an adult staying in that house, we had to agree to. So there's, as like, you get rated as a renter, and also, as someone who's, so there are checks and balances with.
So if I'm hearing you right, some of the checks and balances are more stringent in your case, and that's some other cases, then it would be with a 30-day or longer rental.
Yeah.
An absentee landlord.
One of our experiences, I kind of wish they would have had a fire inspection into that place. That was like, oh, I don't think I wonder if the community knows this place is a rental. So, but Others were, I mean, have been wonderful. So, I mean, it's, that's been the vast majority of,
So we got a total of 15 in the whole city?
Yes. Mhm.
And that's a hard number.
Yeah.
We're good on it.
That's our number, current number.
Okay. Does that count what happened tonight? Does?
Counting tonight, yeah,
Okay.
15
so-
total.
Yeah, okay. I'm not really seeing it as a problem.
No.
Went from 12 to 15, like at least 2017, 2018, 2019, somewhere in there.
Mhm.
We got a grand total of 15. I just don't see it as a big public policy issue.
And what, 2 complaints for a trash can and
Yeah, it wasn't raging parties because you know what? Students who want to party, they have got off-campus apartments where their friend does, and that's
Yeah.
gonna cost them anymore.
right? I mean, I think what, 2 of those, because one was approved and then they came back and had another location of the same owner, was because they just rent to like traveling nurses and they're like, that's who we booked with, and we're booked all the time. I mean, it's. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see a major, I would concur with that. I think we already have good structure in place. The only, thing that I would consider is maybe the substantiated complaint process.
Yeah.
Just to formalize it, and in case for some reason we become a boom town, you already have it in place. But that, I mean, I don't have to be married to that either, so.
I like it, just community knows that we're trying to make sure that these rentals are, used for what they're intended to. It's just a quick stay in Mount Pleasant and
Mhm.
not that. I think, cause we just hear a lot of that, but other than that, like, man, everyone else is echoing. I don't see it being a big.
So Manuel, to that point, if 3D with verified complaints was changed to citations, or citation didn't get tossed out or some other language, that language that you could take back to other people, work on and bring it back to us to see, if something right, how that might work.
Mhm.
Then, yeah, then when people show up because they heard rumors from their neighbor that this is gonna be turned into, second coming, the Animal House movie, and togas and everything like that, well. Kids, then that's something that can come up in staff presentations, that there is a system for actual complaints that stuck. I mean, the actual citations that stuck in a given year, or even over like, up to a 36-month period or something like that too. That seems like that would be, reasonable regardless of the number.
So basically a certain amount of complaints,
Yeah.
in violation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Potential
Violations.
violations received within a 12-month
Yeah.
timeframe. You said 36?
Time frame that seems to be best practices.
Okay.
And maybe it's just quick look at a few other ordinances, like. Not that we're Traverse City, but is there a time period that makes sense more than a year? But other than this could just be a year, because that's probably the easiest without, especially the staff change, other things to look into a time scale.
I was gonna say, I think I saw 24 months as like a common
Mhm.
length of time for that type of, um, process. I
It's
think
not-
the other thing is who would be responsible for tracking and enforcing,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, so right now, the fire department, most violations that we see are related to vehicles parked in weird places, trash, just too much trash. Those are the kinds of things, and maybe a taller grass, so they're more related to the city code. They're not checking for zoning specifically. In this case, our text change will be directly reflected on the general standards for special use permits. So it's more like noise type of complaints, traffic impacts, if they're throwing parties and then out of a sudden your street is flooded with cars coming for a party in an Airbnb. I think that's the kind of thing that would be the types of violations that we're talking about. So I will talk with the fire department and the building safety official to try to understand where that will live, what that could look like. But I believe the planning and buildings department would be the recipient of those types of complaints. And then we would just be logging them, verifying them, providing, letters, notifying. And if we get too many of those that are obviously verified, then then we could revoke the permit. That's what I'm thinking right now.
Yeah, I just have a question about the capacity of the department to review possible complaints for SUPs in general. I wasn't sure if that's a strain that
Yeah. It
is
is.
potentially there.
It certainly is. We don't have them on an annual basis, but eventually we do get them related to a particular project that got approved by the planning commission, something that the neighborhood was not fond of. And then we do get calls, and it does get a lot of our times that are spent on that. Oftentimes, one example, we got complaints about lighting. It is a city code, it's not a zoning ordinance requirement, but it still falls under our departments. And the building official had to go at night, verify with a light meter. And then in the end, they were not in violation, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Mhm. So, yeah, I think the fire department is all the time out there, but how can we check for noise, right? A noise complaint, you have to be someone that's on call. And it will likely happen at night if something like that happens. So it would be extremely difficult to track something like that and verify it. So that is an issue. And the only thing I can think of that I can do is to call potentially other municipalities that have that written, see if how they're doing it, how they're enforcing it. They have some case studies that they can share with us, just on how they went about it. And then see if we can find a good case study to try to replicate.
Just check with the non-touristic ones.
The non-touristic one. Sounds good.
I mean, because I've seen in quite a few of them that they notify you like community quiet time starts at this time,
Hmm.
you know, noise ordinances and things like that. So
Yeah, I think noise, if you're in your house and someone is throwing a party in the middle of the night, you would be calling the police, right? So it would be a complaint that goes to another department, not to us, but then we'll just need to know or note to the other departments that they have to inform us of such complaint. That seems like a good way to fix it. Yeah, that's the only thing I can think of.
I think that's a good idea.
If there's an infrastructure in place for that, I think
Mhm.
that's fine, but I don't think that, having staff chasing down complaints is
Yeah.
probably the best use of time.
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think that sounds good. As an example that popped in my head, for marijuana establishments, we do have to report back to the CRA if there are any flags on those establishments. And the way we do it is by an email, and we get all departments to provide no issues that we've heard of. And each one has their own scope of potential issues. So once we get it cleared, then we send a message to the CRA that we don't see any issues. So I think we could do something like that for short-term rentals.
Cool.
Okay, so we just need to figure out the time frame, the number, and then the language. Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have been advised we don't need to do a formal motion for adjourning, so if there's any other questions, then we are adjourned. Yes.
Bang, bang.
Meeting adjourned.
Hey,
Adjourn. Brother.
you have any plans yet? But the wife and I decided
To get some of the people.
about 90%.
Yeah.
We're gonna
They're-
anniversary
Like-
trip.
Oh, the States,